Good afternoon, Daryl.
Hi, how are you?
Awesome. Great to have you here. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today on Michelle's Conversations That Matter.
It is so good to be here. It's an honor.
Awesome. I am so grateful that the amazing Craig Kramer thought enough to introduce us and that you were willing to join me. I had the opportunity of reading a little bit about your story on LinkedIn one day, and I was so inspired by who you are. So I was excited when you said yes, that you would join me. And so we're going to talk about your mental health story as a leader, a senior leader, because I think that it's such an important aspect when we're looking at removing stigma and really normalizing the conversation. So we're going to dive into that in a second. But first, just want to let people know a little bit about the series and what I do. So I created Michelle's Conversations That Matter to really elevate the conversation about mental health. Educate us about different mental illnesses. I invite clinicians on to help educate us. And then I also have people who successfully have navigated mental health challenges as an opportunity for us to see the hope and the possibility that's there. So that's what the series is about. And I'm grateful for you being here. What I do professionally is I work with organizations to recenter their employees, to bring balance to them through the resilience workshops that I do. I'm fortunate to get to work with some amazing clients, and I love that they care about their people. So let's dive in. I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience, have them know who you are, where you live, and what you do.
Sure, absolutely. And I'm glad I'm not the only one Craig makes call him the amazing Craig Kramer, for sure. You know, I spent 21 years in health system leadership. Most recently, I ran a large division of a national health system in Central Florida, and all the system component parts of hospitals and medical groups, and a huge team of people, and awesome, wonderful folks. And then in January, a guy named Garen Staglin called me and said, Daryl, I'd like you to think about joining One Mind, which is a not-for-profit focused on the mental health continuum, from research in serious mental illness and brain trauma, all the way through to mental health in the workplace efforts and impacting society and the availability of services to people. So I've been here now. I'm a newbie. I've been here about 5 months at One Mind and am loving it. I am in Napa. Having to move to Napa was a penalty of my job change, and it's wow, what a great place to live. A lot of great people, and I'm really enjoying learning a lot about mental health, and frankly don't come with the level of expertise that you might expect, other than through my failure in leadership, and even personally to be as open as I could have been in my own journey. And I suppose a lot of our expertise is developed through failure, and that's where a lot of mine comes from. So I'm excited to be here, and I'm really excited to talk to you today.
So awesome. Why did you choose to say yes, aside from the Napa attraction? Why did you choose to say yes to One Mind, to really like pivot your career into this area?
Well, it's interesting. Throughout 2020 and maybe even some of 2019, I was really assessing purpose and impact. And I think probably a lot of people come to the point in their life where they think, I've been doing this thing for a long time, and it's time for something that makes more direct impact or that has resonance to it. I watched a speaker that I brought in to speak to our leadership team, a guy named Scott Harrison, who runs Charity Water. And he talked about being a nightclub promoter in New York City, literally filling nightclubs. And he hit this point where he said, you know what, I don't want to spend my whole life recruiting people to come to nightclubs. I don't feel purpose there. And so he went to work for Mercy Ships, and then he said he recognized the need for water around the globe and started a company to bring water to the world. And he looked at all of us and he said, I know you're in healthcare, but you know, you could be in healthcare And you could be doing essentially the same thing as nightclub promotion, just filling beds, fighting to fill beds and beat your competitors. And at some point he said, you should think about bringing water to the world. And it just hit me. I thought, wow, it can become a trap. You can get into work where you lose the sense of real meaning and purpose, and it becomes a ladder climb or a compensation chase and things that shouldn't be. So I became very ready for a change, and I started thinking a lot about it, and I journal some, and I journaled, if I could do anything, I think mental health and impacting mental health, it's so fragmented. There's no healthy private economy. I'm not that impressed with some of the work I see around us. Certainly government support for it is variable. So I thought that would be the thing. And then in January, Garen called, and I'd never heard of him. I think everyone else in the world had, but I'd never heard of Garen. And he said, Daryl, I want you to come and be a leader at One Mind. And that I wasn't sure what to think about it, other than it was exactly in keeping with some of the journaling I'd been doing and thinking I'd been doing. And then he exposed me to various board members and ideas, and it just became too compelling. So I came.
So he must have found you through your story and your work that you were
He
doing.
found me. He says he saw me interview Brooke Shields about her postpartum depression at a conference where I sat with her and did kind of a fireside chat with her.
Mhm.
And at that point, he said, I think I want to talk to that guy. And someone who knew me that he knew said, "Oh, don't bother. He won't leave his health system role." And Garen's kind of he's kind of a driven guy,
Yeah,
and of course he chose to bother and reach out anyway, and it just came at a great time.
so great. So would you mind telling everyone your story? Help them understand why you're so connected to this work?
I would love to. When I was in college, I had a traumatic experience with a situation with my roommate that was really tough, and I didn't realize how tough it was until a few months later when I was just doing something random and not associated with the situation with my roommate, and I had a panic attack. The room started spinning. I thought I was dying. I thought I was losing my mind. I didn't know what was happening. And it was so bad, I just had to get out of there. So I was with my girlfriend at the time in college and just ran out of the room, ran down the stairs, ran out into the grass outside, and just was just trying to kind of get my wits about me. That was interesting. She chased me out, said, "What's going on?" I said, "I don't know." It was really interesting because from that point forward, it was kind of like a blanket just kind of came over my perception, my life. It was just different. I wasn't thinking or processing the same way. I was hyper aware. I didn't sleep well. I had thoughts that were racing. I had more panic attacks. And it was a mess. And I was in college, adjusting to the college life. So I went to a psychiatrist finally, but didn't tell anybody. Didn't tell my friends. Certainly, I was embarrassed. I didn't think I should need therapy, but I got some great therapy, thankfully, and I got some great medication. And over about a year, it stabilized. And I kept going, kept running through college, and was thankful for that. But kept that secret very, very close. Um, started my career, started to grow in my career, got to be a leader, got to be named CEO of a hospital for the first time, and then boom, it hit again, kind of out of the blue, panic attack, this kind of, I call it the anxiety blanket. I don't know what the right term is, but this feeling that's different. And I thought, oh man, and I was navigating this new job, knew I couldn't tell anybody, which I think is false, but I really believe that. And went 2 counties over for therapy. I went to a doctor who had, it wasn't on our electronic medical record, paid out of pocket for my medication that I needed, and over time stabilized again. Kept it very secret, never talked about it. Uh, my son grew up and went to college, and his college asked me to come speak. And I thought, well, that's an interesting opportunity. And they're asking because I'm a business leader, and what advice do I have for the
Mhm.
students? And they said, um, whatever you want, whatever you want to talk about. And it hit me one evening while I was thinking about that. I should talk about this. I should talk about what happened in college and my mental health struggle and the fact that I've handled it poorly by keeping it to myself, etc. So I asked my son if I could tell the story. And this is kind of interesting. I hadn't talked to my son about this. I hadn't told my kids about
Oh,
this.
wow.
So this is how bad I was. I
Mhm.
didn't even open up inside of my family about it. And his response was, well, that'd be awesome. Yeah, it's not a big deal.
Mhm.
So
So
that
good.
is a healthier way to view it. And so I went and spoke to, several thousand kids in this big auditorium. And what struck me is afterward, they lined up down the middle hallway. And the conversations we had were so meaningful to me and were so real. I thought, I have to go back to work and I have to talk about this. So I went back to work. I talked to my executive team first, found out things about them for the first time, about their struggles with depression, mental illness, the loss of a loved one to suicide, other things that I would have never known being the kind of leader who didn't talk and didn't open up. In fact, one of them said, it's really hard to be open with you. It was when you seem to have it all together. And so I just started talking more broadly then across our employee team and across the community, and found it to be really powerful, really rewarding, and a weight or a burden off of me as well.
You just said something that really hits home for me, and I know it'll hit home for a lot of people. When we show up as being like we have it all figured out and all together, I think that that is a good thing. Obviously, we want to show up professionally, but the humanness and the authentic, I guess, the authentic side of you um, isn't there. So then there's no relatedness, right? So like you said, there, who would want to approach someone who looks so perfect and buttoned up and has it all together with something like this, you know?
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, first of all, when you pretend to be perfect, you're doing that for you. And I had to wake up to that. That's something I'm doing for myself because I want people to perceive me a certain way. I'm managing my brand. I want to be impressive, and this is a selfish thing I'm doing. If I want to serve other people, if I want to help other people, the only way to do that is to be open, to be authentic, because the pretense of perfection doesn't do anything for struggling souls, right? There's no help, there's no value that comes from that. The other thing is, and I believe this, I think you can lose your real self over time if you don't practice letting it out.
Yeah.
You kind of buy your own story to a degree, your own pretense, and then you lose yourself. And I think a lot of the struggles we all have is that dissonance between what we're trying to present to the world and who we actually are.
Hmm. You said something to me when we had our pre-conversation around you felt that it was your responsibility as a leader, being established in your role, to go first. Even though you felt that, was there any trepidation around judgment of people regardless?
Yes, it did occur to me. It's interesting. I'm not sure that I was very courageous because I waited until I was really established, credible, and understood to be a good leader in the health system. But I still knew that me coming out and talking about this would put a seed of something, a seed of an idea in the minds of people I reported to or the board. And when other big opportunities came along, could that seed hurt me?
Yeah.
And I had to realize that, of course, depending on the thinker,
Yeah.
that I had to accept the fact that, okay, we need the next big leadership position filled, and it probably needs someone who isn't struggling with an anxiety disorder, right?
Right.
And I had to realize, you know what, that I'm not willing to live that way, because would I want to take that position under a false pretense where I
Right.
couldn't be myself and would have to continue to pretend that I was something different? But it did occur to me. It did think about it. And I had to work through it, and I had to get past it. And I also had to realize I don't want to work somewhere where they wouldn't take my 20 plus years of experience and say, wow, this guy is obviously capable, even though
Mhm.
um, just an observation about
Mhm.
myself, and I think it's true for many people. Um, Talent and struggle go together.
Yeah.
They aren't. You can't divide them. You can't say I want the most talented person in the world, and I don't want any of their struggle. The
Yeah.
fact is, the more talented the person is, often the more struggle they have, and that they build on each other. Resilience builds, knowledge builds, capability builds,
Yeah.
creativity grows, and so that talent, and that struggle go together. And companies have to learn how to manage teams of people who are incredibly talented, great thinkers, and have developed some of that strength they have from struggle. And how do you view them as whole, and how do you take care of both sides? And I think that's really the recognition. Oh man, that person is extra capable because look what they've been through and look what they have accomplished as a result.
And that is a very progressive way of thinking, because I don't know that a lot of organizations are there with that thinking, but I find it so incredibly refreshing. What I'm thinking about is like the feedback I've gotten from employees about the fear of, I don't want to be perceived as the weakest link of the team, so no way am I going to say anything about my depression, anxiety, whatever you name it. I don't want to be that person. So it's very real for people. You said something earlier that I want to jump on because I think it's really important. You said, depending on the thinker, whether or not you would be a candidate or not when you were planting seeds. I think that there's a work to do around our biases. I think we have a lot of people that have their own biases around what is mental health. I mean, they may have no relationship to it because they haven't had a loved one struggle, they haven't struggled, or they just don't, or they have a negative one, right? So what are your thoughts around helping people move through their unconscious bias around mental illness?
Yeah. I think first of all, I think the vast majority of people um, can relate. They're not used to
Yeah.
relating on the topic because we have a way as human beings of segmenting or compartmentalizing our lives, and and acting like it's not all interrelated, and feeling isolated in our own struggles, and then relating to the struggles of another from our stronger self that doesn't struggle. But the truth is it's all interrelated. And I think most people, if they pause, they think, yeah, I have a story too, or my family has a story too, and I can identify. And I think we need to teach people to integrate their lives more, and to think as leaders more from that point of empathy or that point of understanding. And that's really critical for great organizations to be able to do that, because that bias tends to impact everything, right? And we know DE&I, right?
Right.
That the linkage between my ability to understand everybody has a different story, and that story makes them who they are, and that story adds value to my organization. That extends to cognitive diversity just as it does to other areas of diversity. And that's critical for leaders to be able to lead effectively, to understand that the value of my organization is built on diversity, equity, inclusion, cognitive diversity, and these experiences and these training. One time, someone said, "Daryl, you handle really hard meetings with a lot of conflict in them really, really well. How do you do that?" And I remember telling them, oh, I learned how to do a lot of that in therapy because I learned breathing. And I think it was a surprising answer. It wasn't like, well, I'm just great. No, I learned breathing techniques. I
Yeah,
learned how to separate myself from the situation emotionally
yeah,
and view it as if I'm watching a show instead of invested personally. I
yeah,
learned techniques in therapy that I use at work, and it makes me better at
yeah.
work. And I think the more that leaders can understand, oh, yeah, that's really good. That's helpful. Then I think it elevates their thinking.
I love that. I've had people say to me, I think this is great, Michelle, that you suggest that leaders go first, but our culture is not really one that would do something like that. But I think what's so powerful about your story is how you went first, and with you going first, you opened up the narrative within your senior team to be like, oh man, I can tell you, this is what I deal with, right? You
Yeah,
created an access for people to just show up and be themselves at the highest level of the organization. That's so powerful. But it does take one person to go first.
it does. And then I wasn't ready for the ripple effects. The
Yeah,
ripple effects happen quickly and are worth thinking about because once you go, then your senior leaders go and they start opening up, and then they start talking, and you all start talking, and the whole organization starts talking. Then your team, I had 30,000 employees that reported ultimately up to me in the division, and they started sending me direct emails about their experiences and their struggles, and I learned things. I learned we had one autism specialist for the entire network, and they were 2 hours away. I never knew that. I didn't intentionally build a terrible network,
yeah,
but I wouldn't have heard from people that our network was broken and that we had kids struggling and families struggling because we didn't have adequate coverage for autism. Those are the kinds of things you'll start to learn quickly when you go first, because people will feel comfortable talking to you about this. But you also have to be ready, because you'll hear about the person struggling with suicidal ideation.
yeah.
And that's not an email you can ignore.
No,
You have to be able to understand, what am I going to do when people start talking?
yeah,
And it's very, very satisfying, but it bears at least a little thought, because the
yeah,
organization will open up. And then when I talk to the community too, the community, mayors, CEOs, I have people saying, can you talk to my kid? Because my kid has a terrible problem with anxiety. And I love all of that. But you start seeing the ripples, and you start seeing the impact, and it's very, very cool. And then you have a little seed of doubt in your mind come up that says, wait a minute, I don't want this to define me. I'm
yeah,
much more than just this. This is part of who I am, and I'm being real. But now I'm the spokesperson of this issue, and how do I work through that?
yeah.
And there's a lot to work through when you do it. And I'm happy to talk to folks about it if they're considering it, but it's worthwhile. It's worth
Yeah.
every minute.
And I guess the trepidation from a lot of people leaders is, I'm not a therapist. I mean, how am I going to try to support my people in their mental health issues? I'm not a therapist. I'm just here to deliver on KPIs. I have a team. We have things we have to get done. I think that's always been the concern, where how do we empower leaders to have those kinds of conversations where they're not feeling like they're stepping out of bounds, but they're really just, creating a space for their employees to be authentic.
Right, right. We need people leaders to elevate. In a recent survey that I saw done by a large teletherapy provider, they asked the frontline and people leaders and CEOs whether they thought their mental health benefits were good or very good. People leaders, over 90% of them said they're good or very good. The front line, 27% said it was good or very good. So the blind spot, the gap between our people leaders and the front lines, understanding how their own team feels about mental health support is huge. The CEOs are in the 60s, so CEOs understand better than our people leaders, which I think should give us all pause, because people leaders are there for the team and to represent and to take on these responsibilities, and I think it's really, really important. So here's a way to think about it. I'm not a therapist. Absolutely, I'm not a therapist either. I can listen. So can you. People leaders can listen. People leaders should listen. People leaders should not try to be therapists. That would be dangerous if they're not trained. They should not do that. People leaders should make sure, as should I, and as should you, that when we listen, we understand our primary role is caring about the other human being and pointing them toward support that's available. If support is not available, we should fix that, because that's our job, is to fix that, to make that support available, so that when we listen, we have a ready place to aim people who need support. So that's a great diagnostic. Oh, I don't know where to send them. Oh, perfect, go fix it. And then start to listen, because we can send people, not just to an EAP. I think that's old school, but toward a layered support structure that gives people the support they need. And then when you listen, you aim people toward support, and then you check back in later. It's so human. It's so wonderful. It's so caring. And people need that. And that's what attaches them to organizations. And then the cool thing is, when our people leaders are able to build that and do that, then we can start to train our middle managers. We can start to train even our C-suites how to safely listen, and how to point toward resources, and how to check back in. And it can change a company so substantially for the better when we do that.
Yeah, I love that so much. One of the things that's been coming up a lot with COVID and returning to some type of work situation, whether it's going to be a hybrid, organizations are trying to figure that out. What is their next step, right? I've heard from so many people that there's going to be a lot of, and there currently is, return to work anxiety, right? Return to work anxiety. I'm now going to have to go into an office for whatever that looks like. So how do we help our people leaders support people that are struggling with, you're making me come into the office, I don't really want to, I'm feeling anxious? How do we support them?
I think it's got several layers to it. And the first thing I'll say globally, that people leaders and senior executives need to really think about, every single employee or team member is starting a new job right now. So in our companies, when people start new jobs, we give them an orientation. But it's easy to think of people who are long-term employees as not needing an orientation. They had one years ago when they started. One thing every company should consider right now is giving everyone an orientation and onboarding as if they're new, because everything is different. We're coming out of this. Here's what it's going to look like. And here's how we're going to take care of you, and how you can feel safe, and how you can feel secure at this company as a new, right now, team member moving into a new future. A lot of why there's anxiety, this is always true of anxiety, is a fear of the unknown, a fear of an uncertain thing, and it's often overblown because of a lack of information. And that's where that orientation can really be helpful. Then I think we need to have some insight into what people are afraid of. One, they're afraid of a virus, some of them. They're afraid of getting ill, a child getting ill, or maybe afraid of making someone ill. So helping people understand how they can gather safely is very important, and not just glossing over that, because there are people who shrug it off, but there are people who don't. And that's really important. A second thing people are afraid of is the volatility of human interaction right now. We were all home for a long time, and while we were all home, it appeared that a lot of groups of people started to hate each other.
Yeah.
And while you're at home, you can spout off however you want to, right? And you can say whatever you want, because your spouse has to listen and your kids have to listen and whatever. When you go to work, though, I think there's a lot of fear that I'm going to get into conflict with these colleagues who I've been isolated from. And whether it's around politics or whether it's on a social issue, people are afraid of conflict. They're afraid of the world they've seen in social media
Yes.
entering their workplace.
Right.
And I think that's where leaders can say, you know what? We're here in an environment in which we're going to care about each other. That's a huge antidote, because if you must win an argument or you must convince people, that's a selfish motivation. If you care about other people, you're not trying to win arguments and you're not trying to make sure they know everything you know or the dark corner of the internet you found, right?
Yeah.
That's different. That motivation is, oh, I care about people and my company expects me to care about people and all the rules are based on that. I think I can figure that out. But
Yeah.
people need to understand work's going to be safe. It's going to be a safe space where we can talk about important things from a position of caring, not from a position of argument. And I think that'll help too.
Amazing. Yeah, really good advice. I know that that's a very real concern for a lot of people. What is your hope for the culture you left behind when you came to One Mind? I mean, where did you leave it? What was it like when you left, and what was your hope for it when you left?
Well, first of all, when I spoke out, it did not hurt me in the company. I found out that people resonated with it. Senior leaders appreciated it. My boss appreciated it. The board appreciated it. And I think that taught me a lesson about, don't assume that your company can't handle this kind of conversation. Now, I don't want people to get in trouble. They may be in a company where it could be an impact to them, and they need to make sure they help build a new culture in that company. But what I left behind, it continues to invest more in mental health and behavioral health services, to continue a conversation that's very public, and to continue an emphasis on this topic that didn't exist before a lot of this conversation started. So I watch with pride as all of that continues, and it obviously doesn't require me in order to continue. And I think any of us can light a spark that gets a fire going, and it's really cool to see when it happens.
So awesome. So any final words of wisdom? We are almost at the end of our time. I could talk to you all day, but any final words of wisdom you want to share with leaders, with other CEOs who maybe, are thinking about doing exactly what you did?
Well, I think first of all, just knowing it does start with you, and we all have a great opportunity right now. It may be that you don't feel comfortable sharing your family's story or your personal story, but we've all just been through a global pandemic. So you have no excuse. You have something. You have a story. You've been through the pandemic as a leader. You've experienced that. You've had that day when you didn't know if you could go on, or maybe you cried or you struggled, and you can tell people about it. So that's the cool thing. We have a shared experience and you can talk about it. And I would encourage everybody to start there. And then from there, that openness it leads to culture building, work design efforts, creation of access, and let that build, because your team will love it. Your team will love it. And more teams are expecting that of us.
So amazing. I echo everything you're saying. I think it's so needed right now. And you're so right. We have an excuse with this pandemic. We also have far too many people suffering because of the pandemic. So we really do need to jump on this as an opportunity to shift culture. So thank you so much for joining me, Daryl. It's been great to chat with you.
Thanks for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it too.
Awesome. All right. We will stay in touch. Thank you for all your work.
All right.